Hi, it's Alex here, also known as Defaultsound, and welcome to the next part in the Vertex Colors tutorial series. And today we're going to start actually painting our fence panel that we modelled, and start off by learning how to use the Vertex Paint tool in Blender in order to add some colour to our fence panel. So first things first is we're just going to go over again our viewing shading method, or viewport shading method down here. Currently we are in solid mode, so what this does by default is just render our meshes with this default grey material. So if we want to view this with our vertex color, I'm going to have to change this to texture, and it will turn it completely white. And that's because at the moment the vertex colors on our fence are completely white. So we're going to have to paint some information in here to give it a bit more oomph, or a bit more interest and lighting information. So I'm going to select our object here, and I'm going to come down to where we have object mode, and I'm going to select Vertex Paint, and that will change our panel here on the left with some new options. So what we've got here is our brush. For now I'm going to leave it on draw since we're only going to be painting solid color. So if you click on this, you've got some other options. If you're familiar with, say, Photoshop, some of these options may be familiar, but for now I'm just going to keep it on draw. Down here we have a color picker that we're able to choose our hue, saturation and value. We are able to change the radius of our brush here, and we're also able to change the strength. But for now we're not too worried about how we're going to paint, because what we will be doing is selecting individual faces and using those faces to mask the areas that we want to paint on. So that may seem a little bit confusing, but I'll try my best to explain it. So right now if I just click anywhere, let's change our value so we can see what we're doing. I'll just make it a little bit of a green color. If I paint anywhere, this is just going to start painting freely on our mesh here. And the problem is we have no control of where we want to paint. So what we can do, so we come down here to the bottom here, we've got this thing called face selection masking for painting. And what this allows us to do is select specific faces and only have them paint on those faces. So if you check this box here, you'll see our mesh will suddenly change to this sort of wireframe view. And at the moment, if I try and click and paint, I'm not able to, besides this one face. That's because this face is in the mask selection. So if I undo that, and what you can do is if you hold shift and left click, you're able to select what faces you want to paint on. So what this will allow us to do is mask off certain faces we want to paint on and add in some shadow information. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to paint the whole entirety of our fence the standard shade of color we want, and I'm going to make this a slightly less color of white, lower shade of grey. So it's about points, that's probably a bit too low, maybe 0.893, maybe a little bit higher, near white but not quite white. I'm then going to hit A, and that will allow us to select everything in our mask selection here. And what we can do is, instead of having to click and paint, we can actually come under this paint menu here and click set vertex colors, and what this will do is fill the active layer with our current paint selection. So if we click that, that will automatically set all the vertices to that color. So that's what we want there. And then I'm going to hit A again to deselect our face selection. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint in some shadows in between the cracks here in our fence, because technically if light was illuminating this, there wouldn't be much light between where the fence panels are. So I'm going to come to our color selection here, and I'm going to bring it down quite low, roughly 0.3 or so. And this time I'm going to left click and select all our crevices here where each panel sits. Like so. And then what we can do is actually just fill whatever we've got selected again with set vertex colors. And what that will do is paint those crevices there a darker value. So if we look at this now back in object mode, you can start to see how we can start to see the profile of our fence a bit better, as currently there is no lighting in our scene. We are literally just using the vertex colors in order to paint lighting information into our mesh. So I'm going to come back into Vertex Paint, and I've noticed that the silhouette on the peaks of our fence here is not quite easy to see. So I'm going to add a bit of shadow information on one side of these. So I'm going to come into our mask select mode, shift left click on this side, and I'm going to give it a slightly lighter shade of grey. And if we look at our paint, we can do the set vertex colors again, but if you notice there's a shortcut, Shift K, so I'm just going to use Shift K to fill that quickly. Now if we look in object mode, we can start to see the silhouette a lot better of our fence here. Now I'm noticing that this still is kind of, you can see one continuous shade, so I'm going to, on this side, paint it a slightly darker shade of grey again, but a bit more closer to white, just to separate the two sides. So again, I'm going to come into Vertex Paint mode, select the opposite sides of the peaks, and just hit Shift K to fill that. So now we can really start to see the profile of our mesh here. That's looking quite good. Now the next step would be to obviously add some information to our beams here, as they kind of just blur into the white and you can't really see them. So I'm going to come into Vertex Paint mode again, select the bottoms of them, as obviously these would be occluded by, these would create shadow at the bottom here. Bring our value down again to something low, and I'm just going to fill that in as well. So now we can see the bottoms of that. And I think just for the sake of being able to see these a bit better, go back into object mode, Vertex Paint mode. I think I'm going to paint the front faces a slightly darker shade, not too dark. So it looks, oh, that's probably a bit too dark. Just bring it up a bit more, just so we can see them a bit better. Actually, I'm not too happy with that, so I'm going to sample. Actually, let's just come out of Vertex Color mode. So in this case, I want to get this exact white value back again. We can click on our palette here and then click this little eyedropper, and that will give us that value. And I'm going to come back into mask selection mode and just fill that. And what I'm going to do instead is actually these top panels here, I'm actually going to set them to a even higher value, ever so slightly, just so when you see this you can just pick out that there is a panel here. And yeah, there we go, we've got our fence panels painted. So now we can get a pretty good idea of how these would look in the game, and we've basically just painted in some light information. So this is without any lighting, and this is actually how a lot of the early games textured their assets in the early 90s. They'd literally just rely on the colour of the vertices or the faces in order to give the illusion of shading and lighting. So one last thing I'm going to add is, I've just thought, is these side pieces here we are probably going to want to paint as well, as when we duplicate this there'll still be a crevice between where each panel sits. I'm just going to quickly come into Vertex Paint mode, select these two side pieces here. Before I do that, I'm actually going to color pick this value here and just hit Shift K to fill that. And I've just thought I'll fill these side bits here as well. And there we go. And then we can just add a quick array modifier on there. Again, just slide it along the y-axis. I can get a rough idea of how that would look. So there we go. That's the first asset, fully modelled and painted. Now I think we'll move on to the next step, which will probably be the grass.